Europe and therefore, in that rudimentary sense, born a European. Mapmakers, all the way back to Eratosthenes some 2,200 years ago, have always placed Britain in Europe, a region counterposed to Asia and Africa, in what is probably the oldest continuous mental subdivision of the world. So long as there has been a geographical notion of Europe, our vaguely triangular islands have been part of it. But I was not born a European, in the stronger sense of being brought up to think of myself as one. The only time my mother referred to herself as a European was when she reminisced about her youth in British-ruled India, where she was born a daughter of the Raj. As a European, she told me, happily recalling some romantic months spent as a young woman in New Delhi at the end of the Second World War, one went out riding early in the morning. In India, the English called themselves Europeans. Only back home do they still often like to deny a truth that seems self-evident to anyone looking at them from Washington, Beijing, Siberia, or Tasmania. I never heard my father talk of himself as a European, even though his formative experience had been landing on a Normandy beach with the first wave of British troops on D-Day and fighting with the liberation armies all the way across northern Europe, until he quietly, exhaustedly welcomed VE, Victory in Europe Day, in a tank somewhere on the North German plain. One of his favoured Conservative Prime Ministers, Harold Macmillan, supposedly remarked of the legendary French President Charles de Gaulle that he says Europe and means France. But that was equally true of Englishmen of my father's ilk. When they said Europe, they meant in the first place France, as the English had done for at least 6 centuries, since the 100 Years' War shaped the national identities of France and England, each against the other. For my father, Europe was definitely foreign, and the European Union was one of those knavish tricks that our national anthem calls upon patriotic Brits to frustrate. I once gave him a large chocolate euro for Christmas, and he promptly devoured it, gnashing his teeth with theatrical delight. A lifelong, active Conservative, in his old age he briefly, to my horror, defected to UKIP, the UK Independence Party. Had he still been alive in 2016, he would undoubtedly have voted for Brexit. I feel myself blessed by historical luck to have grown up in England, a land that I love. But that geographical fact did not make me a European. I became a conscious European sometime between that first schoolboy inhalation of Gauloise tobacco smoke in 1969 and signing books in revolutionary Budapest in 1989. My diary, for Friday the 12th of August 1977, records an evening spent in a West Berlin pizzeria with Karl, an Austrian electrician, film guide and taxi driver, whom my toffee-nosed 22-year-old Oxford graduate self describes as a recognisably civilised fellow European. Wouldn't do to have an uncivilised pizza companion, would it? Still and all, a fellow European. This book is a personal history of Europe. It's not an autobiography. Rather, this is history illustrated by memoir. I draw on my own journals, notebooks, photographs, memories, reading, watching and listening over the last half-century, but also on the recollections of others. So when I say personal history, I don't just mean my own. I mean history as experienced by individual people and exemplified by their stories. I quote from my conversations with European leaders where this helps to illuminate the story, but also from many encounters with so-called ordinary people, who were often more remarkable human beings than their leaders. I have visited or revisited some places to see for myself, as journalists do. I have also drawn on the best primary sources and most recent scholarship, as historians do. Unlike in the reportage and commentaries I wrote as things happened, here I make full use of the benefit of hindsight. Hindsight, they say, is 20/20. And although the view from the early 2020s is far from perfect, some things have become clearer. I always strive to be accurate, truthful and fair, but I make no claim to be comprehensive, impartial or objective. A young Greek writer would paint a different Europe, as would an elderly Finn, a Scottish nationalist, a Swiss environmentalist or a Portuguese feminist. Europeans can have multiple homelands,